Hello, in this video I will demonstrate how to use free and open source tool Docify to build user documentations for your project. I have a toolkit library in C#, which is an open source project and published on NuGet. I'm currently using that library in some of my other open source and closed source projects. I think that project may benefit other developers, so I decided to make it more accessible. Of course, that involves writing a good documentation so developers could understand how the code works. And today I will demonstrate how to write a good user guides which are very easy to maintain using Docify. I'm going to keep documentation in the same repository in the source code of my library. For that, I will create a new folder called Docs where I'm going to store my files. Of course, you might decide to use other structure for your documentation. Docify supports Markdown and rather pages like syntax. I will start by creating my main page and call it index.md. And now I simply need to write the content for my documentation. You might have used similar syntax when doing README in GitHub projects. Markdown lets you define HTML elements such as headers, links, images in a very easy and human-readable way. So now I just want to add new image which I'm going to refer in my documentation, so I can simply select an image name and use a special Markdown syntax to add this to my page. I can also refer code snippets directly in my documentation. Markdown allows you to concentrate on the content, and if you add this to the source control, it will be very easy for you to understand what has been changed in documentations between revisions. Now we have completed our initial documentation and we can see the preview in Visual Studio Code. Now let's compile this Markdown into the HTML page so we can host it as a static website. For that, I will install Docify.NET Core tool from NuGet. For that, I simply need to run .NET tool install Docify command from my terminal. I can serve that website for viewing using Docify serve command. This will create a temporary host for me, so I can simply navigate to the URL to see the result. As you can see, our HTML page has been rendered. It doesn't look that good, it doesn't have syntax highlighting, it also not a good alignment and style, but we're going to change that in the moment. We can also open the actual compiled page and inspect our HTML. Docify provides a library of components, themes and plugins which you can use to improve your website. Let's firstly add the plugin to highlight a syntax for our code. At first, we need to install the standard library. Library is installed per user, so you can reuse it across different sites. We need to run Docify library install command. We can now refer that plugin in our site. For that, I'm going to create config.yaml file, which is a configuration file for our site. I need to specify the ID of the plugin under the plugin's property of that configuration file. Now we can serve our site with reference to the library. I need to use lib argument and specify the star as a library name. This would tell Docify to refer the standard library, as you can also use a custom library, and in this case you're going to specify the path to that library. If you are using Docify on other operating systems such as Linux, you might need to protect the star symbol with the quotes. Let's open page and validate the result. And as you can see, the code syntax is currently highlighted for our snippets. Standard library of Docify provides themes which has a predefined templates, layout, components and plugins to target specific need. For this documentation, I'm going to use user guide theme. You can also customize it if you want it. In order to add theme to my site, I need to specify that in a configuration file. So I need to go to config.yaml and specify the name of the theme I want to use. Now I can add some additional parameters to my page so it's going to be used by components defined in theme. I can specify a title and description. You can specify page attributes by using the front matter, which is a YAML between the triple dash at the top of the page. Let's also add the logo here, so I'm just going to copy the image and just refer that in my page. I will add this image directly to page content. I can also specify the width of that image, and I'm also going to refer that in my page attribute. Finally, I'm going to refer the layout for that page which comes from the library. Let's now search the site and see the result. And as you can see, our documentation looks much better now. We have some additional components such as sharing widget, we have a search and table of content. We can perform some sample search to see how it works. So you can see it brings us the page. Of course, you would not want to keep that documentation in a single file, so you might want to split that across different pages and in different folders. So I'm just going to create a new folder structure, and I'm just going to copy the piece about the enum combo box into that specific file. As a result, I'm going to have a separate page for that particular control. In a very similar way, I'm going to add several attributes to my page, such as title and description. As I have other controls and other functionality in my library, I'm going to create corresponding folders for those pages as well. I will create one for utilities and another one for number box control. For now, I just fill a title for that page and will add content later. And I will modify the main page, which is going to be an entry point to my site. As all of my pages are going to share the same article layout, instead of specifying that for individual page, I can specify the global setting in the configuration. I will use default layout property, and unless explicitly overridden, all pages will inherit that layout. I will also move my image from the root folder into the enum combo box folder, as this is an asset of that particular page. Now let's serve the site and see the result. As you can see, Docify has automatically created a table of content which matches the structure of your folders and pages. So it is extremely simple to add new articles, new structures, or move the pages around. I want to also point out that the generated URL matches the folder names. Now let's talk about the way of improving management of code snippets. As your library and documentation grows, you might have dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of code snippets to manage. And keeping them embedded in the page will make it harder to maintain them. Your library might introduce new methods, mark some old methods as obsolete, or even remove certain methods. So some of the snippets in your documentation might be outdated or even not workable at all. I bet you already run into the situation where you're reading documentation of certain library and you cannot just use that code because it's outdated. As a first step, we can move our snippets into the external files. So let me create a separate file for that enumeration. So I'm just going to create a new file here, call it enum.cs, and just copy paste the code over here. Next, we can use code snippets plugin from the standard library, which is already a part of user guide theme. This plugin has quite a few features which we are going to explore later in the video. First one is it allows us to include the code snippet from an external file. We can use includes, which is another feature of Docify, and we can just specify the name of the file to include. Let's now compile the code and see how it works. As I haven't modified my snippet but only changed the way I'm loading it, I'm expecting to have exactly the same result in my final HTML file. And as you can see, my HTML page is exactly the same, but now it's much easier to manage that code snippets from my site. Quite often you might want to provide different examples in different codes for your library. So in this case, I also want to create an example in visualbasic.net. I will create another file for visualbasic.net example and will paste the corresponding code in there. Now, of course, you can refer this example in exact same way as you did a C# one, but instead I want to show you another feature of this plugin is to add tabs automatically for your code snippet. Let's modify this include and add two tabs, one for C# where we can specify the corresponding file name and another one for visualbasic.net. It is as simple as this. Now let's recompile our site and see the result. Let's open the page. And you can see that our example now is grouped into the visualbasic.net and C# tabs. As I will always be using the same tabs across my documentation, I can use another feature of that plugin to use Autotops. This feature allows to define the association between the file extension of the snippet and the tab name. I'm just going to leave it as it is, but of course you can modify it as per your needs. And now the syntax of this code snippet could be simplified. So I can just use file name again, but instead of specifying the extension of the file, I'm just going to use a wildcard. Plugin will find all the files matching this wildcard, match them toward the Autotop settings, and will create a tabs automatically. Let's validate it. I expect my HTML page to look exactly the same as it was before. So let's open that. And you can see I have my tabs for visualbasic.net and C# example correspondingly. Although keeping snippets in the separate file will make it easier to manage, but it still doesn't solve our problem, as we still need to manually review and change our snippets when our library changes. Let's take a slightly different approach for this. Let me create a new folder called src, where I'm just going to create a subfolder wpf, where I will be holding a project which will contain all of my snippets. This code will be compilable, so I can make sure that all of the code used in my snippets can be compiled. I will create new project from Visual Studio Code, but of course you can use a Visual Studio to do that as well. This command has generated a new project for me in a new subfolder, so I just want to move that project files one level up and refer that from Visual Studio. As I will be adding snippets for my library, I will reference that project directly. Now let me go ahead and create several files which I'm going to consume from my documentation. So this will be a file which is going to hold a enum declaration and also the sample view model. I will also create WPF control, which is going to reference that view model and use our enum combo box control. I will just bring the correct namespace and add my control into the grid. I will bind the value from my enumeration into the control value property. We can now compile the code to make sure it still works. Let's now copy the name of this file and come back to our documentation and update the links to the snippets. I will need to modify the path in my include to link to the src WPF folder. I will repeat the same process for another two snippets. Before compiling the site, I need to make sure that I'm on the correct folder, so I just need to go 2 levels up and can run the serve command again. When I open the site, I can see that now it is incorrect because I'm referring the same snippet twice, and I also do not have visualbasic.net example, but I'm going to modify this shortly. In many cases, I would not want to refer the whole snippet into my documentations. Sometimes I just want to emphasize on a particular functionality, but it is still beneficial for me to keep that file as it is in my source code, so I can properly compile it. Fortunately, this Docify plugin supports regions, so I can simply add labels and refer those into my page. Regions are defined with triple dashes followed by the name of the region. I will create one for enum and view model. You can refer documentation of a way to refer regions from your code snippet. Let me now copy that code and add it to my page. I will use enum region in my first code snippet. I just need to make sure that the syntax of include is correct, so I need to add the parentheses for my parameters. I'm going to copy paste this include and change the region to view model. I will keep the example snippet as is, as I do not use regions in there. So let's compile the site and see the result. So now our documentation looks correct, and I also want to point out that the snippets have a jagged line, indicating that this snippet is not a complete piece of code. while the example snippet doesn't have jagged lines because it is a full file rendered here. I will now go ahead and create a snippet from my Visual Basic.NET example. I'm just going to copy that file, change the extension, and play the code. Unfortunately, I cannot mix Visual Basic and C# code, so in this case I still can refer that file, but its build action is set to none, so it's not going to be compiled. So I need to create a new Visual Basic project and refer that file in there. I will fast forward this step, and now I just want to refer that file into my project. I'm just going to link it as a reference instead of adding this locally, so all of my files will remain in that main file. So I just do it add as link. So this project can now be compiled. Let's come back to Visual Studio Code and serve the site again, so we should see the tabs now in our site. And as you can see, it is now rendered correctly. In a similar manner, I can create a documentation for the remaining functionality of my toolkit. Let me fast forward the video to show you the final result. I have added more snippets into my WPF docs. I have also created a separate project for my utils documentation and also created some snippets in here. I have updated documentation accordingly, creating new folders and new files and some new images. Let me now show you how the final website looks. So I have added more top-level items. I have added new documentation for my file system browser with C# and VB.NET examples. I have also created a page for a new control and user settings management. Let me also open the folder which contains the output HTML files for my site. As you can see, there are quite a lot of files generated here, so we automatically have an RSS feed, sitemap, etc. All of HTML pages have been automatically optimized for search engines. Meta tags, LinkedIn, Twitter, Open Graph cards have been automatically generated as well. But we can also notice that all the files from our source project have been included as well, which is not a correct way. Furthermore, you can notice that I'm using the same folder in all of my snippets. We can simplify that by using the snippets folder option in a plugin. I just need to specify the snippet folder and I can refer that in my snippets as a shortcut. Furthermore, I have an option to automatically exclude all of the files from the snippet folder from being published. I just need to specify the folder name into my snippets folder property, and I can refer that folder using the tilde in all of my snippets. Now it is a bit easier to refer those snippets in my pages. Of course, you can still use the old way as well. And as you can see, now SRC folder is not included into our output site. And all of our snippets on the site rendered correctly. Now I want to show you how easy it is to react to the changes to your library. I have a helper class here called FSO Browser, allowing me to browse for folder and file. FSO stands for File System Object, and I actually want to go and modify the name of that helper class to make it easier for my users to understand what this class is doing. I can rename the class name here, and using the power of refactoring, I can automatically relink all of my references to this class, including documentation. I'm also going to change the name of methods in exactly the same way. Finally, I will change the file name to match my class name. I'm going to rebuild the solution to make sure that all of my references have been refactored successfully. And let's serve the site again and see the result. I will just refresh my previously cached page, and as you can see, all of the snippets have been instantly updated. You can make the process of building and publishing documentation for your library as a part of your CI/CD pipeline, so your documentation will always up to date automatically. In next video, I will demonstrate how to integrate the documentation build process into CI/CD pipeline and how to host your documentation site for free. I will also create and publish a series of tutorials for Docify functionality. I will explain how you can create custom components, includes, themes, plugins, etc. Thank you for watching this video.